Welcome back to Running and Research with Chris. Today I just want to go over a recap of my recent HYROX competition in Dublin and give you guys some information that will better help you prepare and to know what to expect at your first HYROX competition. So let's get into it. So I'm sure if you're watching this video, it's probably to try and give you a better idea of how you will perform at your first HYROX competition. There are a few variables that you can't control and a few things that you've probably never experienced even in your own training that you will come across on the competition floor. I'm going to try to explain my experience with these variables and how you can maybe factor them in to your own expectations on competition day. So just a bit of background for comparison with yourself. I'm a 6 foot tall athlete. I weigh 85 kilograms. I have a background in strength, which has kind of taken a backseat recently to my running, which is why I entered HYROX. And I have a 19-minute and 52-second 5K. So those are just a few metrics that you can maybe go by whenever I'm explaining to you how I felt at each station. And maybe, you're stronger than me, you're heavier than me, and you can expect some stations to be a wee bit easier. If you're lighter or maybe a bit of a weaker athlete but better runner, you can just prepare then for maybe struggling at a couple of the stations. So personally, I think the biggest difference are the variables that appear on competition day compared to your training. In training, you can do your best to minimize the discrepancy between the equipment that you're using and the equipment that you will then use at a HYROX competition. The issue is it's very hard to replicate this. So the first variable I would like to talk about is the Roxzone. So this is kind of the no man's land between finishing your run and then starting the next station. It will change per station as certain stations are located further away from the inn to the Roxzone. So it will take you a bit longer then to get to these stations. However, they are then more likely to be positioned closer to the out of the Roxzone into the run. However, if you're running exactly a kilometer in training, expect the Roxzone to add another 30 seconds between finishing your run to starting the next station, and it might even take another 30 or 40 seconds after that station to get back out to start your run. So there's already potentially a minute per station that you haven't factored into your expectations on the day, and that time will be added up at the end. In addition to the Roxzone distance, once you enter through the archway to start the station, it would say ski erg. You might then have to run, 50 meters to get to your designated ski erg. There will be a judge there pointing for you to come in here. They might be 50 meters away. That's worth noting. That will happen at every station. As soon as you enter through that archway, your time for that station begins. So say you're planning on doing a 4-minute flat row. However, once you enter the archway for the row zone, it might take 20 seconds to get down to your rower. It might take another 10 seconds if you're good to get your feet in, to start pulling on the chain. And then again, to get back out, you're going to have to get your feet out, get off the seat, wait for the judge to approve you, which typically only takes a few seconds. They normally stand right behind the athletes who are currently on the stations anyway. And then you may need to run a wee bit further down the opposite direction from the way you came in to then run around the barrier to go back out the other end, and that might even add on 20-30 seconds again. So your 4-minute row has now become a 5-minute station. So that's just a wee bit in terms of the Roxzone and then the additional distance to get to your stations that maybe you don't experience in training in your gym. You might run exactly a kilometer and then it might only be 10 meters into your gym when you get to your station. It will be a lot longer than that at HYROX. Just prepare for that, and you can kind of lower your expectations then, and it's less upsetting then if you have a goal in mind. The next biggest element that will be likely completely different to how you've trained will be the sled push and the sled pull. Now, the main reason why this is because of the carpet that you're pushing the sled on. It will be rolled out over the floor, it will be stuck down with tape. However, I entered the pro category, and when you're pushing 200 kilos on a carpet, it tends to wrinkle in front of the sled, and this increases the friction, and it requires more force then to push the sled over these wrinkles, and it's certainly a lot more fatiguing, and I had to brake a lot more than I'd expected to. But that is what it is. Everybody's in the same boat. Another element about the sled push is that the center pole. So typically you can see in the video here, I'm putting my arms around the stanchion poles on the side that I can push, and that puts my chest and my head over the weights. Now in training, I trained on a sled that didn't have a very large stanchion pole, so I could get as low as I wanted. Well, I couldn't go as low as the stack height of the weights, but that pole was in my way, so I couldn't quite get as low as I wanted. And you can see here I'm actually kind of lifting the sled a wee bit. I thought that was fine. Other videos, other instructors online said you kind of do want to lift the sled a bit. However, with the amount of wrinkling that was happening on the carpet beneath my sled, when I was lifting it, the front of it was getting stuck into the ground. And there was a couple of times I literally came to a standstill, even though I wasn't fatigued or having to brake yet. And so I had to brake a lot more often. This was a bit of a problem, and the station took me about 2 minutes longer than I'd expected. It took me about 6 minutes 30 seconds, and I would have expected to do this station in about 4 minutes 30. Not the biggest deal. It is what it is. Everybody in the same boat. However, I'd maybe recommend going for the technique where you have your hands on the poles if you want to get lower. So then you're not wasting energy by pushing slightly upwards. Everything's going forward. That would probably be a bit better. I did see other athletes putting their head beside the center pole, so they'd get in, get their arms around, and they'd be so low that they'd have to put their head beside the pole. I don't know, I've never tried it, but it might be difficult to keep pushing that sled on a very narrow straight line. Now, the station that kind of really made the biggest difference and was by far the biggest hindrance to my performance in the pro category was the sled pull. Now, I had trained with a sled. If you're training in the likes of Pure Gym or a big corporate gym, and you've got that nice AstroTurf for the grass to pull on, everything's stuck down, it's so much easier to move these sleds with that weight on those surfaces. You might not have a 12.5 meter rope that you have to stand and pull it from 12.5 meters away, but trust me, this was easily twice as hard as I could have imagined it ever would be. As soon as I started the sled pull, I knew I was in trouble. The sled being 12.5 meters away, it was extremely difficult to get that moving. I had watched videos prior, I had seen that it's not about pulling with your arms. In the pro category, that was never an option for me. What I had to do was essentially grab the rope with straight arms, take the slack out of it, lean back, and walk it back. That is how I had trained. That was fine in training. However, as you can see in this video, I could barely even walk the sled back. Each rep, my ass was nearly touching the floor, and I was essentially doing a max deadlift. I was panicking a wee bit. I think if I got to practice this more, I could really refine my technique. I would probably lean back more, and that would help me be able to walk the sled back. As you can see, I'm kind of deadlifting and standing up. So I've only got the range from my low squat to me standing up full, which is about 1 meter. So I was only pulling that sled about 1 meter each pull, and it took a lot of effort to get that moving. So unfortunately, the sled took me 12 minutes. This was demoralizing. I kind of thought in training, sled pull took me 4, 5 minutes max. Took me 12 minutes at HYROX, and I was not the slowest athlete. There was one athlete in the pro category who didn't complete this station, and there was a couple of athletes who took over 20 minutes, believe it or not, at this one station. The distance for the sled pull, when it's 12.5 meters away, it's very difficult to get it moving. Once you get the sled within about 5 meters of yourself, it becomes massively easier. So you could factor that into your training. It's so much easier to move it when it's only a couple of meters away from you, and you tend to speed up. I just struggled massively with pulling this sled when it was at its furthest away until it got over halfway. I also found that the rope at HYROX is slightly elasticated, almost a wee bit like a bungee. So when you think you've taken the slack out of it, sometimes there's a bit more to come, and you'll start your drive to pull this back, and the rope will just extend and the sled won't move, and that's wasted energy. And it took me by surprise, and it took me a few pulls to get used to that. And even then, under that much fatigue and a wee bit of panic, like, there really wasn't much coordination here for me. In the middle of competition, I knew then I was already, on the third station, and the best part of 8 minutes behind where I should have been, which is 2 stations for me almost. So I knew then it was just going to be a big slog, and it was about getting through HYROX rather than trying to chase a goal time. The other stations, the erg stations, they're kind of as expected. I explained you just have to add a bit of time on getting into the stations. Personally found the burpee station and the lunge station easier at HYROX because it's just 2 lengths. You go up and down. In my gym, it's not that long, so we were doing 5 by 16 meter lengths on the burpees, and that stopping and turning really does take it out of you. So the burpees was actually my highest ranking station. As you can see, it was within the top 50, and I was really happy with that. I took my breaths at the bottom. I don't rest at the top. There's no requirement in HYROX to stand up tall. Now, I caught 2 or 3 athletes who were resting at the top and then dreading going into their next rep, and they were honestly over 20 meters ahead of me. They would rest at the top, do a slow burpee, rest at the top. I kind of realized in training that I can rest on the floor, and then I never have to waste that much energy standing up completely. So I kind of half stand up, do my broad jump, get back down into the burpee, take 2 deliberate breaths. It looks slow, but proportionally I beat a lot more athletes on this burpee station than all the other stations. Farmer carries, kind of as expected, they were always going to take me about 3 minutes or so. My traps get really burnt up on these. 32 kilos, felt pretty heavy. We don't have that in my gym. The highest pair would be 28 kilos. However, the handles of HYROX are a bit smaller than the kettlebells I train with, so this was very welcome. It was definitely easier to hold on to them. It was never an issue of grip. For me, it's always an issue of my shoulders burning up. So I have to break a few times on the farmer carry. There's some animals out there going, unbroken in a minute 40 seconds. That's not me. And finally, the other big variable for me was the wall balls. So I got to the wall ball station at about 91 minutes. Bear in mind, my original expectation was between 80 and 85 minutes. So I was pretty demoralized at this stage. Got to the wall ball station and it's a 9 kilo wall ball for the pro athletes. In my gym where I train, we don't have like standardized CrossFit wall balls. The CrossFit gym I train in, it's almost like a heavy basketball. They're rubber, they're smaller, you can kind of hold them about this close. Really easy, and we wall ball against a brick wall with painted targets on it. So I know how close to stand to it. At HYROX, you've got a large leather cased ball. They're smooth. You can chalk up. I didn't originally, but I have sweaty hands. My hands kept slipping off the wall ball. I was losing that little bit of pop, and I kept hitting the female target and not the male target. Plenty of no reps. I also was a bit confused at how close to stand to the target, the floating target. So because I'm used to standing against the wall, I can position myself accordingly by looking down at my feet to see how close I am to the wall. You can't do that at HYROX because it's just space in front of you. It's a floating target, so I was unfamiliar with knowing how close to stand to the target when it was just floating above me. Because of that, I also did plenty of reps where I threw the ball high enough. However, it just didn't make contact with the target. It just ghosted up past it and came straight back down. It's a no rep. So I reckon I did about 140 wall balls in total to get to my 100 wall balls. In training, 100 wall balls. I'm not the quickest at wall balls. I haven't been doing a lot of CrossFit recently. In training, 100 wall balls, 6 minutes, 30 seconds. At HYROX, when I was demoralized, kind of mentally defeated, to be honest, I kept getting no reps. There was one time I did 7 reps and I was awarded 2 good reps. There was times I was doing 2 or 3 reps and getting 0. So I was very demoralized. I didn't have a lot of motivation to pick that ball up again. And it took me, over 11 minutes, as you can see. My total time was 101 minutes. and I just felt defeated by the end of it. I didn't feel like a victory, and that's all because of the expectations that I had and the goal time that I had. I was nowhere near it. I was completely off the mark. Finally, it's worth noting that at HYROX Dublin, in particular, the venue wasn't very well suited. This is not an excuse, this is just a fact. What happened was there seemed to be a bit of confusion. They sent out an email about how they had changed the entry into the arena, and there was obviously a discrepancy with how many laps you had to do and the distance that you were doing. Now in training, if I was completely dying, like really suffering, I'd probably run a 5:05 or a 5:10 kilometer. At HYROX Dublin, I was running a 6:15 or 6:20, as you can see. I can tell you now, I was not running that slow. My GPS obviously wasn't working indoors. However, I was timing myself from when I got out, and then checking my watch again when I finished the run and realized they were over 6 minutes. This is because the laps were actually 1,200 meters. Sorry, not laps, I'm referring to the run. First run was 2.5 laps, and it seemed to be closer to 700-800 meters. And the next 6 laps then, the next 6 runs then were all 3.5 laps, and they were pretty much 1,200 meters. This was recognized by many athletes, and it was complained about. I didn't know until the next day that this was the case. And then the last run was about 1,100 meters. It was about 100 meters shorter because the wall ball station was in a different area to the Roxzone. So again, probably had the best part. Yes, the first one took 2 minutes off. My goal was to hold just under 5 minute kilometers, 450, 455. I'm really comfortable in there. And you can see all my runs were, mid 5, high 5s and low 6s. So that's really another 6 or 7 minutes added on to my total time. So between the sleds, the runs, and my technical faults on the wall balls and a complete demoralization, I've really lost the best part of 10-15 minutes. Would I have gone 80 minutes if everything had been planned and perfect? No. I can tell you now, I wouldn't have. It was definitely, the sleds were a lot heavier and they took a lot more energy out of me than I expected. So that's something I would better prepare for next time. You just have to make the surface more difficult. You can push on a harder surface, go outside on the concrete like anything, but now I know how the pro weights feel, and I can really prepare for that in the future. If I will enter again, I just don't know. Maybe I'll go open so I can actually get through the stations. Well, hopefully you guys have learned something from this. I'm not trying to put you off. I'm just trying to minimize the expectations for your first HYROX, because it's very, very difficult to know how you're going to perform in that environment when there's variables that you just cannot control. Thanks for watching the video. Remember to leave a comment down below. Do you have a HYROX event coming up? Have you had similar experiences? Please subscribe and leave a like. Thank you.